It's April 5th, 2023. Um, I'm just going through some of the life experiences um, I've been through. For some reason, the recall of um, being asked by Lions in health class when I returned to Cold Spring Harbor. I never left the Glen when I went to Dominic's, St. Dominic's, which was a teaching institution or they call it school here, but it was a preparatory school of some sort. Not to be confused with like a Manhattan preparatory school. It's different. Um, it's a series of rooms I was in. I know what it means. Anyhow, so um, they sent Lions to health class. He, again, he was another one who was just so nice to me, um, and invited me to a meeting, um, for which I went. And that's where I met the person. It was a late night meeting. Um, I had to be like all of, I think, 15 or 16. Um, and I took, I think, a taxi. It was too late to ride my bike, so I took a taxi into Huntington from the Glen. Um, and I met with these gentlemen. Um, and one of the gentlemen outside the building um, said something about King George and ancestry. I didn't know what that meant. I was fully engaged and giving him my full attention. It seemed to be very important. But these were words almost like, he seemed so admirable to me, in the way he spoke, not unlike people that I went to school with while living at the Glen. They all had this. Again, if you live on Long Island, you know the difference between the North Shore and the South Shore. There's just this. It's just a different way of being without putting any fire into that. Like I'm not adversarial. I am what I am, and I'm caught between this whatever that is very confusing. Um, so I grew up on the North Shore of Long Island, in a glen, and around people that I thought spoke admirably, their sentence structure, their plain English. Um, I appreciated being amongst them, although sometimes there was bullying that went on. There were girls that came to school. Jackie Lieberg was my witness, my God's witness there. That's when I got the paper from the GOD, um, which then we had to come up with how is that pronounced in our own class, which was, they said God, which I had never heard of at that point, even though I was going to the Episcopalian on Sundays for Sunday school, just so this way the fish hatchery and the Long Island whatever with the Red Cross was whatever and whatever for protection of my father was doing philanthropy, um, or reliant upon philanthropy. And so I So that happened. So this man came. I mean, he spoke, but he spoke almost like he was almost not that he was. I didn't feel like he was. It didn't sound like he was from the theologic department. It sounded more like he walked out of a storybook. Like again, I mean, he was a different type of charming. I mean, it and and so and I've not met many men at that caliber in my life. But he mentioned King George, and where I was growing up in the Glen, there was no speak of kings or prince or any of that. Um, there was some current events when I was in elementary school at Lloyd Harbor, some newspapers that we clippings that they brought in. They sent in special people to verify that I wasn't learning Russian or Greek and I didn't know Hebrew. They already confirmed that that wasn't being taught anywhere in my I was only being taught English. They already confirmed that. So um and then there was the physical fitness test to make sure that we were operational um, in our whatever and had a baseline of health um, as children. So I know these are important facts. And then I don't know what happened because there was no real instruction as to like I mean as a flower. I mean like at home with my grandfather said that in his family, the women are flowers. They are delicate, beautiful flowers that men are to appreciate. And that is how he wanted me to be handled and admired and loved. Um, and that was all he ever said. And it was when I was younger. And then it was never spoken of ever again. Um, and then after whatever happened with the Glen, and we were moved to Queens, back to my grandfather's house, where Queens had gone through some kind of I don't know what while we were gone. Um, it was dangerous. I mean, going from North Shore, the Glen, into Queens. I mean, the local public school, which was Bayside High School, had metal detectors. I was not comfortable. Um, then there was then there was St. Francis Prep, but they did not accept seniors. Same thing with St. Mary's, which I would have happily have gone to Manhasset. It's where I would have felt more comfortable. Um, and so then the only other choice was St. John's, which was not my first choice ever, in Astoria on Crescent Street. Um, and there, um, they didn't have clubs geared towards my person. I'm pretty sure they said something about their group they were children that um, were doctors and lawyers, which I said, all right. I said, thank you for sharing that with me. I was like, do you have anything, like if you have these clubs that are geared more towards this catering towards this stepping group that you have, do you have anything geared towards more European ancestry? I mean, I don't know how to politely ask for something that feels more comfortable to my person. Um, and so she said that everything went through some kind of licensing process in the city, and that they didn't have anything set up for Europeans or European ancestry. But she could ask. I think she said she could ask. But then nothing ever came of it. Um, and so I spent the whole year. There was nothing to even at St. John's, there was nothing even to participate in. Um, so I stayed in the wing where I was, I suppose, safest, especially after I was attacked after school. Um, and that was it. So that happened. Um, and that was in 95, 96 year because we graduated in 1996. And then I didn't hear or see anything from I haven't heard anything from St. John's Prep. They ask for money. I don't even have a job. Like, they didn't even prep me for, like, there was no career track. There was no, speaking of, like, civic service. There was no civilian service. There was no any engagement whatsoever. It was they took the money for the senior year, gave me the diploma, and then never heard from them ever again. And they go by something called their name was St. John's Preparatory. And on one of the alumni letters asking for money, it said something about St. Vincent. I have no idea what that's about. But going back to the King George person that I had met, um, I've only heard of General George Washington. Nobody really, other than that one encounter or one meeting, has anybody ever even mentioned that there was a King George. When I look it up on Google, um, it seems to be that, and I don't even have the correct and like genealogical, like chronological order of things. Um, but I can follow that trail. The only reason why this is coming up for me now, I believe, is what's going on with Trump. Not that, and not really to speak on it, but I mean, it's just that if this was the corporate for the country that they put into the White House, um, and nobody, I even said to Linda this morning, because Linda listed like these details of things she thinks he did. I'm like, listen, Lynn, I was like, I have to be real honest with you. I was like, I have no way of researching exact details and knowing without a shadow of a doubt all the things that he did during his presidency. I don't know how to do that. I don't know anybody who does know how to do that. I was like, so all the things on the media, I'm relying on third party information. I was like, so it's really hard to have an opinion because I don't know if it's somebody else who has an axe to grind and they're taking it out on him, like unlawfully, like, but it's like out of control right now. I mean, and then I'm thinking to myself, Trump wears this orange makeup. I wonder if that's something like Ireland, they were talking about green or orange. That was important. And I'm like, instead of him wearing like a cherry blossom white makeup, I'm like, he's wearing an orange makeup. I don't know what that has to do with, but I have noticed it. But again, that seems like that these are important details to I don't know who. But what does concern me is just this attack of the corporate office, it's just how I look at it, and not wanting to seem weak in any way to anything that might be adversarial outside of the scope of our domestic issues going on that may be watching very carefully. That always is a concern for me because there's always this inside and then outside view, and how you portray yourself and look is always so important, and how you treat the inside employees, especially when there's outside work always going on in some outside network that, I mean, I don't really know anything about. So, and I'm in this at the moment. So that concerns me. That's just weighing heavily on me. And then thinking to myself, this prejudice that, or discrimination, I feel, along with an attack during my senior year of high school before graduation, in Queens, in Astoria. Um, and so, and again, like all these things happening and not knowing, like, where is a safe place to file these things that have happened. Um, I don't know how to get or where to even find. I mean, somebody comes to you and says they're a representative of King George, and they know that to be so. And you're someone who's in an area that knows of a General George Washington, and that's really all you know. Um, it's, and then to be treated in a General George Washington area the way I've been treated, or to be, for better words, mistreated the way that I've been mistreated. Um, it's just, it's not right. I mean, like, on like a human, basic human level, it's not right. Um, Especially since I don't know these grievances of these people with these doctorates and these lawyers who have this invented history that they teach and carry forward of hatred or holding grudges against the future generations. I'm not part of that. I don't know why they would be prejudiced or discriminatory against my person being of European descent. It makes no sense to me. I, again, when they said that they were descendants of whatever they said they were descendants of, I had no prior history on any of them. I didn't even know how our interpersonal relationship with them being of doctors and lawyers, I mean, how they might perceive me, or any built up hatred that they may have had towards my person, not wanting to approve a club for European ancestry so I could meet. I mean, again, my senior year, I went to a brand new high school. I walked in the building. I bring no prejudice to the situation other than the fact that I don't know any of the kids. I don't know their names. I don't know their faces. I don't know what they're part of from what they're associated with. But that's like turning on the television. That's like looking at Trump. I know nothing about the man. And there's there's it's a blank slate for which, you know, I mean, but he's on the television and he has a motorcade and he's important in American history because he's made it to the presidency. Um, but I'm just sitting here in this conundrum. And then they put on yesterday for me on April 4th, um, Admiral Mick Raven. And I was listening to him speak. He won some title called a Bullfrog. And I'm like, the only book I've ever read on a frog is Mr. Frog's Adventures with Mr. Toad. My father read it to me when I was little. And that was the only child's book I've ever read, but it was in the house and it was one of the important ones. Actually, it was one of my favorite ones. Um, I made my father read that to me over and over and over again. Um, but other than that, I didn't know where a frog actually was relevant because of this disconnect somehow um, with service and not being offered entryway into any type of service whatsoever. Um, so again, and I know that I'm a flower, and then I was a special flower because my flower produced a seed in the garden that calculates and predicts differently than some of the other flowers in the garden. Um, but again, this is stuff where I'm supposed to be protected and I feel completely abandoned and I don't know by whom or by what. And I don't know how all of these factors are affecting my ability to even just be a woman at this point. Um, so I'm going to reference again the McCraven piece because again he's of some really admirable, and again I didn't follow his career, so if he has any blemishes I don't want that to be held against me in whatever axes and grudges people have against people that on the television he looks very corporate, or I've heard them say PC but I don't even really know what that means. But professional I guess is another word that they use. Yesterday in the local area, I got a call 2 days ago from someone who um, wanted, like, I don't like email. I don't use email. I don't really use a computer. I stay away from it. Computers have a tendency to just get computer viruses when I use them. I don't know why. So I stay away from technology as best I can, limited use. And so 2 days ago, somebody called from something called a CEC. No idea who they are, but it came out of left field, and I apologized, and I'm like, I'm trying to follow along. I was like, but I'm I thought it had to do with an award for something I had signed my son up for within the school, but then he said it had something to do with the DOE, and he was the CEC. And I'm like, okay, like again, I don't know the alphabet soup and how it translates out in synonyms. And I don't know if it's synonyms, I believe, when every letter stands for something and then the alphabet soup it together. Um, so I was trying to follow, but I appreciate it and I thanked thoroughly for the phone call. I also had my heart checked yesterday. I know that was important and whatever and whatever, whatever, whatever. Um, I went to the cardiologist, or cardiovascular specialist, and I updated him on the thyroid that they prescribed, but I never needed. I told him how long I had been taking it until I realized I no longer needed it. Again, he took very copious notes in his computer system of whatever. And so I went to that level doctor yesterday to have my heart checked. Um, and while I was at the doctor, uh, the tenant upstairs asked for the exterminator because she found cockroaches. Um, and so Linda and Lou called in the exterminating company, and the exterminating company sent a representative who said that he discovered we have German cockroaches, not American cockroaches. And where that's relevant is apparently the German cockroach stays central to the kitchen, and the American cockroach seems to spread out. So that distinction was helpful in I don't know what for Lin and Lu, but it seems important. Um, so I'm gonna go reference the CBS mornings where they have um, the admirable um, McRaven on the um, on the television for things that are so out of reach. I don't even know. I mean, it's. I mean, he's lived in a series and pattern of day and night cycles at such a different frequency. It's almost like if I actually got to meet such a person, that he's on a completely different planet his entire life. Like, it is so foreign to me, so alien in thinking about what, like, unfathomable almost, unless I read a book on his life about what he could have, his life experiences could have been that built him into the man that he is, in this most honorable position with this um, honorable Bullfrog title, in charge of the SEALs. Um, that it's so distant in capability. Like, I wouldn't even know if I could restart my life over again to know that I would want to meet this man somehow, somewhere in my life, and build the road and pathway of possibility from where I was born to where he existed. I I'm at a loss. I am, with how the labyrinth and where the labyrinth took me, and what my conscious awareness of was that he actually existed in the world in the same time frame that I've been moving through these series of rooms, and he's been moving through the world in his series of rooms and meetings and whatever. I don't know where that bridge is or pathway of success to get from the level that I've been held at in New York, or held back in New York, because it's really how I feel. I feel like that someone somewhere has purposely, like, again, I don't know if that's what's called a king's cross, and I don't want to give excuses to the pathetic, but if they're using a king's cross to hold me back as some excuse or partition or whatever in strategies that aren't even fathomable to the general's public, and especially the ones that don't actively read and worship these admirable figures, almost as like demigods. I mean, I am in star God. I was given the letter, and I had, as a flower, I gave birth to the special seed. That somewhere where he's able to reach, he's closer to reaching the answer of who I should be speaking to and how this should be handled. And especially the more recent attacks at divine crimes that have happened. And who needs to know about divine crimes? Where do you report divine crimes? What defines a divine crime? I mean, like, there's so much it's, and then to expect that I'm able to find these answers on my own and to just leave, it's inhumane. It really, I mean, being and working for something called a God, which the locals here called God, and then not being handled or being mistreated is such a miscarriage of justice. I mean, but it feels like just opportunistic. I don't know. It's just, it's, so I'm going to pause this. Again, I'm in this. So, oh, and on this Episcopalian thing, I met a woman in the new Episcopalian church that I've been to, and I say new in the sense of I went to St. John's Episcopalian Church. I then went to a St. John's preparatory school elsewhere. One only met with Reverend Lee on Sundays for Sunday school. When I went to St. John's Prep in 95, 96, it was a Monday through Friday school, and that was the St. Vincent. Two totally different demographics, two totally different set of characters, two totally different purposes. And so now I'm at Zion under the Episcopalian. Same person that I was when I was in St. John's Episcopal on Sunday school. And I meet a woman who's able to do this. I was not asked within the Episcopalian community. They were not teaching us how to form this out of a reed. She informs me that at her level of Episcopalian entry, they would work in the guild room on crafting and made these, which I really was appreciative that she even offered to help turn my single read into this and help me with the craft. She did not want to teach me. She simply did it for me. And then Linda and Lou had gone down. Lou went to spend time Palm Sunday with his sisters, and they went to church. They received palms, and they sent my relatives, my direct ancestors that I have access to, on Lewis's side. They sent the reeds up, which are they were the long reeds, which are now dried out, but they're not in any form or semblance, not as crafty or talented or whatever as this skill, for as far as skill level goes. So I know that these are important details as well. So I'm going to pause this for a minute, and I'm going to go pull up this piece with this admirable piece on CBS Mornings. So it starts, which I thought was interesting. It goes from Drew straight into this interview.
On CBS New York.
But changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it. So what starts here can indeed change the world. But the question is, what will the world look like after you change it?
That was now retired four-star Navy Admiral Willie McRaven in 2014, encouraging college graduates to lead the next generation toward a better future.
Now, I've never graduated college. I did go to classes. And on that CEC call, they had me, I thought that they wanted, the way he explained it, it was a little confusing, I'll be honest, in a professional, like how I received the message, not in a critique against the professional that called, because he was very, it seemed like a very executive type phone call. But and I don't want to hurt feelings. However, I was trying to follow along. I thought it was for this piece that I had signed my son up for 'cause the school won some award for some after school program. But it turns out that alphabet soup or synonym, I think that, again, I'm going to go with that word because I can't confirm it while I'm on my phone. Um, or acronym, I think that's what it is, acronym, um, has something to do with funding special projects that then they award to the different schools. So whatever um, it was a Zoom call. So I had them email Lynn. I forwarded it to Lou, and then I went on last night. But it was about special needs and learning disabilities, but they were calling it neurodivergent and disabled. And I'm like, that's interesting. And it was like some new terminology I hadn't heard, but it was presented in a way that was very informative and educational and helpful. I guess in corporate terms, it might be sensitivity training, or more like of an inclusive, because even though I've had sons with IEPs, these types of services have not been offered to my person. But I did get the phone call, and then they followed up with the email, which was very helpful for me as whatever. And I engaged in that last night. Um, so that level of service was offered last night. So anyhow, so I'm looking, just like I looked to that Zoom call to find out about these new trendy words of what the PC, like if they changed from, if special needs are no longer appropriate verbiage or language, where's Langley like sending us in language? Again, the GOD is very confusing for me to try to traverse at this point, based on some of the, again, like, I don't know, is it custodial? Is it janitorial? It's like, I feel like a lost child somewhere at zoo level or somewhere at the aquarium. I don't really know how to raise my hand. I'm doing the best that I can. But I'm also looking for words of wisdom from the real, like, got their stuff together and was gifted opportunity by the GOD and really like hit it home. And that's how I look at McRaven.
Raven's nearly 40-year military career included time as a Navy SEAL and commander of all U.S. Special Operations Forces. He advised Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and is best known for overseeing the raid that ended with the death of Osama bin Laden. His new book is called The Wisdom of the Bullfrog, Leadership Made Simple But Not Easy. He writes about lessons he learned over decades as a leader. Admiral William McRaven, good to see you again.
Good to be here, thanks.
So this book is called The Wisdom of the Bullfrog. What does it mean to be a bullfrog?
So Bullfrog is the title given to the longest serving Navy SEAL on active duty. So in 2011, I was given the title of the Bullfrog. But remember, we are first and foremost Navy frogmen. So when you are the oldest serving or the longest serving frogman, you are the Bullfrog.
Gotcha. So what I love about this book is that you've got the usual suspects like von Clausewitz and Moltke the Elder, not to be confused with Moltke the Younger, but
For me, what the journalist is saying, I know that, like, when they meet these men, they want to impress them and they do research on them. But again, I imagine they have a dossier of what the upcoming guests are, and they know how to perform their job and stroke egos. As a child lost at the zoo and at the aquarium, who doesn't have a schedule of upcoming meetings, I wouldn't even know. For example, coming back from St. Dominic's after I was attacked and going into Cold Spring Harbor, where I felt safer, because in Cold Spring Harbor it was almost like it was a verbal attack, and very aggressive verbal behavior in the lower grades, but nothing physical. And then it was almost like isolation, by the local community who were country club kids, while I was not able to afford that level of lifestyle, but was able to go to school with them. So it's like this weird hybrid. Um, and so, but I felt safer there because they never put their hands on me. Um, and they just rather ignore me than to physically rough me up or whatever. Whereas St. Dominic's, those were South Shore kids, predominantly going to a North Shore Catholic hybrid, and that's where after school the attack happened. Just so details are crystal clear.
But you also had Taylor Swift that you quote. You also have.
Oh, I apologize. So, when I went back to Cold Spring Harbor, that was junior year. They sent me in a study hall with Mr. Healy. Mr. Healy, then at some point, study hall was, originally I think it was global studies. Then it changed on my schedule to study hall. Then study hall went with the boys that were attending study hall, had their schedules changed. So then it was just me and Mr. Healy. So he took me to the teacher's lounge, and he wanted me to work on, they were giving me a focus item. Dr. Egan was there. And who else was there? Dr. Egan. And someone they referred to as Scott was there. And I didn't know if it was allowable for me to call him Scott, which was his first name, or if he had a preference, but he said no, that was all right. So there's Mr. Healy, Dr. Egan, and Scott in the history teacher's lounge. And they wanted me to write a thesis. First one I had ever been asked to write, only one I've ever been asked to write. I did not know what a thesis was. So they had to go through this process where I was trying to follow along on something completely foreign and brand new to me, and how to itemize out the thoughts and then put it into an integrated paper, and like sentence structure and thought and how to really construct and itemize and then logically pathway it. It was very helpful the way that they taught it, and it was just me and them. There were no other students there. So I really appreciate that, like, individual time given. And this was, I suppose, I had to do research to do this thesis, which again, I had never done a research paper before. And so they said, well, you have to find a topic for this to research. And they said, do you have any heroes, any like sports, whatever, any kind of career, like any models or any kind of idols or icons or anything? And I was drawing blanks. I'm like, nope. And like anything that at home, anything your parents, like, what's their focus? Like, who do they talk about a lot? Like, who might you want to do a paper on if there's like a household name that you hear a lot? I'm like, nope. I'm like, they work a lot. They're rarely home. And when they do, they talk about their business, but it's people around the office and there's no books written on them. So they're like, what about places your parents have taken you? And I'm like, we went to like Cancun. Like, you want people? Because like, I mean, as a country, I mean, we went to Mexico once. Um, and so they're like, any names in Mexico, you know? I'm like, no, we went to a resort and then we came home. And so it was so long story. Then one of them said, what about Disney? Did your parents ever take you to Disney? I'm like, oh, they did take me to Disney. Oh, and then they said, well, there's a man behind Disney called Walt Disney. And I was like, oh, okay. So then maybe I'll do it on, is it all right if I do that on him? And they said, you could do it on anything you want. And I'm like, okay, well, then that solves that crisis. So there we go. And that was like the only paper I ever wrote as far as research papers. Just so my whatever is updated, right?
Winfrey that you quote in the book, but I was really moved by the chapter on when it's time to command, you command. And I was relaying to you a story when I was an Army cadet at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I took my platoon directly into the line of a sniper fire. This is simulated, obviously. And I got a satisfactory by the cadre officer, and he said, rather than sitting down while the sniper was taking pot shots at you, you ran, you made a decision, and you told your team to execute that decision. It moved me what you wrote about. Explain what Nimitz faced during the Battle of Midway.
Yeah, so the story takes place in 1942, June 1942, and Nimitz is debating whether or not he's going to move the Pacific Fleet to engage the Japanese at Midway, and the intelligence is not very clear. So he has the real anxiety of what should I do? What should I do? He goes to visit Admiral Bull Halsey, who is in the hospital, and Bull Halsey was notoriously kind of gruff. And he's kind of confiding to Halsey that he just doesn't know what to do. And Halsey turns to him and says, sir, you told me one time, when in command, command. And the point being, when you're in charge, when you're the leader, you have to take decisive steps sometimes. You have to be prepared to make decisions. The rank and file want you to show them that you have a plan. They want you to be decisive. And sometimes, even when your decisions are wrong, they will appreciate the fact that you moved out with a certain amount of confidence, and that's the point of that chapter.
And let me ask you a question about when you're in leadership. How do you keep from getting insulated and isolated? People live in their bubbles now.
They do.
How do you fight that to make sure you're getting good information so you can make that call?
Yeah, so it really does. The culture's got to start at the top. So as a leader, you've got to make sure that the men and women that work for you understand that you're prepared to hear bad news. And you've got to do that by when your staff comes together, you let them know, look, if I'm doing something wrong, if I'm about to walk into a minefield, whether it's virtual or realistic, then please tell me, engage me. If you do not do that, if you create kind of a toxic work environment and people are afraid to come to you, then you're going to make a lot of mistakes because your people aren't telling you ground truth.
Now, despite your accomplishments, highly respected, highly decorated, you say that you're still learning how to be a better leader.
Yeah.
How is that?
Well, every single day. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Nate, as you well know, no matter what you're doing, every single day, you better be prepared to learn.
Yeah.
And leadership is a journey. And so every single day, I mean, when I was a Navy SEAL, when I ran the University of Texas system, even today, outside of both of those realms, I'm learning. I'm learning from my students. I teach at the University of Texas LBJ School. I learn from my millennials and Gen Zs how to be a better leader. So, yeah, you learn every single day.
Makes sense.
And I want to know what you learned in that raid to kill Osama bin Laden, because you said there were 165 phases that went into the planning. Every possible scenario was explored.
Right.
How did that change you?
Well, fortunately, by the time the raid comes along, I had been a Navy SEAL for a very long time. And you've got to do a couple things. One, it's going to be risky. So you want to work hard to plan the risk out of it. The fact of the matter is, they never show it in the movies, they never talk about it in the books, but about 3/4 of the mission is spent planning. Right. Because you want to kind of reduce the risk to the least possible level. But then you also have to trust the men and women that work for you. You've got to give them the right tools to do the job, you've got to give them the training to do the job, and then you've got to give them the latitude to go out and do the job. And I trusted the men that were working for me on that mission, and obviously they did what was expected.
Now, there's so many reasons why people should read this book, but chapter 10 is one of my favorites. I'm not necessarily a Swiftie,
Yeah.
but this quote by Taylor Swift
I know, it's hardcore.
it's everything. Just because you made a good plan doesn't mean that's what's going to happen.
Right.
And that's the chapter, No Plan Survives First Contact with the Enemy. That is powerful.
Yeah.
And how much is that important to you, that you have to understand that a good plan doesn't always work initially?
Well, and in fact, the story starts off with me as a Navy midshipman. And this was the multi-reference. The fact of the matter is, you learn very early on in the military that no plan. You can make the best plan in the world, but the enemy gets a vote. And so no plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Admiral McRaven, always great to have you, sir. Thank you very much. The Wisdom of the Bullfrogs is on sale today. We'll be right back.
That just parallels.
So I look to leaders. I mean, again, he's on CBS. He makes this very compelling argument as far where, like, under the umbrella of free speech, that there is, like, a musician. I mean, again, not saying that, but a musician who's singing off key. They give them some kind of special equipment in order to make sure the reverb, so they can stay pitch perfect. Being so isolated and so disconnected and not even knowing a pathway towards freedom or even sustainable self, like if they put me here in a bubble for some reason, how do I self-sustain? Like, I mean, it's beyond having to tread water and going into a man of war position. Just so my swim coach at summer camp is clear, who was on the side of the pool and was, we'll call it, rigorous in his, I mean, he also looked to be of a caliber of someone who may have had a closer relationship with something in an intelligent community. It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole Cataruza. It's Earth, solar system, Milky Way, universe, galaxy is broken. And it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.